This is going to be a really detailed video on what to expect on day one and how it could affect you. Now, if you want to know how I'm trading during the day in reaction to some of these announcements, make sure to be a part of the Stocks and Psychology of Money group linked down below. You get all my trade alerts every time I make a day trade, a swing trade, a long trade, any kind of trade alert that I got to send you, I send it to you there. So make sure you're a part of that. Linked below. Let's get started. Hey everyone, me Kevin here. Oh boy, Donald Trump's day one is already shaping up. You can't make this up, but just this morning, front page of the Wall Street Journal, the top article, Trump advisors ramp up work on mass deportation push to get started essentially on day one. And so in this video, what we're gonna do is we're going to talk about the massive dictator on day one plans for what Donald Trump is thinking when it comes to deportations, tax breaks. What can Donald Trump do? What about natural gas and oil? What about benefits to you? And what does this mean to you in the stock market? Let's break down everything we know about Donald Trump's dictator on day one plans. And when I say that, it's not meant to be a slam like the Democrats used it. Instead, it's just quoting Donald Trump. So we'll keep it neutral here and let's just get into the actual policies. So I think that's usually what can unite us, is talking about actual policy and then going, all right, well, Kevin, what does this actually mean for us? Let's get into it. First, let's hit this deportation article. Advisors for Trump are already planning the massive deportations that Donald Trump promised during his campaign. And keep in mind his closing line when he basically wrapped up his acceptance speech. His closing line was, promises made, promises kept. So buckle up. You're about to see some of these get executed. Let's see how they end up working. But first, think about this contrast. Joe Biden had a rule not to pursue illegals who entered the country and then subsequently did not commit other crimes. So in other words, if you got into the country, you sort of had this Florida-style wet foot, dry foot policy where if you got in, you made it to the U.S. and you just didn't break any other laws, they didn't really chase you down or prosecute you. Donald Trump plans to end that right away. In fact, he might go as far as declaring a national emergency on day one, or soon after he begins his presidency, to use the military assets, which could be the National Guard or other national or military bases throughout the country, to basically begin mass deporting people. So think about it like rounding folks basically up in convoys, bringing them to military bases and flying them out on C-130s lined up like troops going to war. Discussions of this began months before the election in terms of how they're going to plan to target 1.3 million immigrants with final deportation orders. They're going to find them, round them up, and send them out. This does include some with criminal convictions. And Donald Trump argues that he's going to find the other 8 million as well that came into the country illegally and deport all of them, potentially up to as many as 20 million, although the 20 million number is a number that's been debated. It's unclear if there actually are 20 million undocumented immigrants in the country. Some people say it's closer to 11 million, and that grew to around 13 or maybe 14 under Biden. Donald Trump says it was, or sort of implies it was 0 and turned into 20 million when Biden took over. The number's somewhere in between there. But anyway, this is a big deal. In fact, there are a lot of people who have families in the United States, and they are frankly part of undocumented families. I mean, we still got to get to tax policy, and there's a lot to cover, but I think it's worth listening to this one. Listen to this one for a moment.
That one day they would come home and he wouldn't be here.
So he lives in the shadows. The family asks we don't show his face or share his name because they worry he could be deported.
I don't make any trouble. I just go work and coming home. My family is everything for me.
Tonight, millions of families bracing for what's next.
Expectedly, life is probably about to change for families like this because even though they've been living in the shadows already, they might have to go even deeper into the shadows. I know of undocumented immigrants who are now trying to get further and further away from the border on purpose. They won't even travel to areas like San Diego to purposely stay away from potential roundup efforts that, might start having tracking efforts begin now before the Trump presidency, as the departments like the Department of Homeland Security prepare. It's kind of interesting. Advisors for Trump are already considering declaring national emergencies on day one to repurpose Pentagon funds to basically get more money to be able to do and conduct this deportation right away. Now, Donald Trump has promised that this would be a day one national emergency. I'm skeptical that it's actually going to happen on day one, but if it does, this could be the largest deportation in history, says the Wall Street Journal. Donald Trump plans to renegotiate remain in Mexico and intends to revoke the temporary protected status that millions, probably millions at this point, but the Biden administration says in the upper, 800,000 range, but probably millions of Haitians, Venezuelans, Afghans, Ukrainians, and others who entered the United States received so they can have temporary protected status. They get to stay here. They can get a driver's license. They can get a taxpayer identification number. They can have work authorization, and they're allowed to stay here for a period of 1-2 years. And sometimes that gets extended in perpetuity, or they marry somebody who's an American. They become American themselves, and then they're basically here forever. So Representative Chip Roy says that a lot of these protective statuses, and he's a Republican, were issued illegally and therefore should be disregarded anyway. And even though they're going to try to start with voluntary deportations, they think there's going to be a big and massive roundup effort. Now, this is where taxation comes up and where we can talk about some of Donald Trump's plans for using budget reconciliation. This is a really fancy and complicated phrase, but just think about it this way. If you want to pass a bill, let's say this is a bill. You want to pass this bill through Congress, you have to get through a filibuster, which requires 60 votes in the Senate. Well, if you do something through budget reconciliation, that is, it has something to do with the debt limit, revenue, or spending, you could bypass that 60-vote rule, and you could get policy done with just a simple majority, which is 50 plus 1 in the Senate, which the Republicans have. This means through budget reconciliation, Donald Trump could potentially limit the Inflation Reduction Act, get rid of EV tax credits. I don't actually think he will, but he says he will. Issue new potential tax cuts and tax changes, such as no taxes on tips, potential Social Security tax changes. We'll touch on those a little bit more in a moment. But you could potentially also throw in more funding for the Department of Homeland Security and the military to get these mass deportations underway. This is really interesting. Some members of Congress are already talking about how you can impose new fees as part of the immigration process to actually fund deportations. See, right now, application fees for asylum, for example, are totally free, but they bog our country down in massive bureaucratic processes to try to deal with the court hearings without any sort of funding. The Trump administration's advisors are saying, let's charge for this. Maybe the way I think about it is, maybe charge for legal immigration. And then what you do is you cut out all of the illegal organizations and cartels that make money bringing people to the United States. Just charge a fee and say, hey, we'll have a streamlined legal way to do it. And you don't have to risk your lives, going swimming across rivers or whatever. It's crazy. Anyway. These are all expected to be part of a larger budget reconciliation process really early in the Trump campaign. In addition to this, we expect that Donald Trump, let's just kind of get on Social Security since we're on the topic of taxes here. Donald Trump, when it comes to Social Security, might not do a full removal of no tax on Social Security income, but what they might do is sort of a phased or laddered approach where what they could do is, and this would just be sort of a way to make sure that they can balance some of their funding. What they might do is say, hey, we're going to issue no tax on tips, maybe we'll bring back some of the state and local tax deductions, which generally benefit states like California, New York, and Jersey, and also limit some of the taxes on Social Security income, but only for those who have reached a certain age. So, for example, maybe at retirement age, you pay normal taxes on your Social Security income, but maybe that starts fading away once you hit thresholds like 70, 75, 80, or whatever. Or maybe there's going to be some form of means testing where, you know, somebody who is a millionaire who's collecting Social Security, they pay taxes on their Social Security. But somebody who has a net worth under a certain amount, maybe they don't pay taxes on their Social Security. So stay tuned for details on this. So that's immigration, deportation, and taxes. Then, I mean, yesterday, foreign policy, this is going to be crazy. Yesterday, we heard about this assassination plan or plot by a Faraj Shakiri. He's actually an Afghan, and he's in Iran apparently right now. They've unsealed charges against him. The FBI has recorded phone calls while in Iran, allegedly, on this person. This person spent 14 years in prison for robbery, and people expect that these sort of plots and basically antagonists, how would you phrase this? This antagonism against Donald Trump will just aggravate Trump to get even harder and exert maximum pressure 2.0 against Iran. Now, remember previously, Donald Trump limited oil sales by Iran to other countries by basically sanctioning countries that were buying oil from them. He also tore up the Iran nuclear deal. Now, they expect to potentially go maximum pressure 2.0 and say, no buying oil from Iran again unless we get some kind of win-win deal from Iran, and it has to be a deal on Trump's terms, so he says. Now, one of the things that sort of goes with this new maximum pressure campaign on Iran is expanding the oil industry in the United States. One of the things that he could potentially do is push for more liquefied natural gas exports and new export terminals in the United States. Basically a way to try to bring more revenue to the United States for exporting natural gas, which we get plenty of through fracking, as well as obviously our oil industry. Biden paused new natural gas export terminals, and if Donald Trump starts rebuilding them or authorizing them, we wouldn't actually see them probably for another 5 years or so, but you could expect to see very rapid changes on some of the pollution restrictions around oil and natural gas. See, Donald Trump expects to revoke waivers that allow states like California to tighten pollution standards and make it very difficult for industries in California, for example, to transport fossil fuels or to even expand existing natural gas peaker plants, for example, with more efficient equipment. When I ran for governor in California, what we found was that California, even though you had natural gas peaker plants from the 70s that were in operations, those plants had trouble updating their plants to 2024 technologies, or at the time 2021 technologies, because the rules in California say unless you're 100% green, you just can't update. So even though you could have 50-year newer and cleaner technology, regulation wanted it to be 100% green and you just can't do it. That's California for you. And Donald Trump wants to kill some of those regulatory burdens on the oil and natural gas industry. Donald Trump expects to install an energy czar to help coordinate these cuts. And really, his goal is let's expand the supply of fossil fuels rather than trying to constrain demand, which was more popular under the Biden administration, to try to limit the demand. This was associated with the EV mandate, for example, even though obviously energy that goes into batteries does come from fossil fuels. Yeah, the efficiency is a little bit better for electric vehicles. Topic for a different video. Donald Trump has made his intentions very clear. Now, as far as tariffs, everybody's sort of confused as to exactly what Donald Trump is going to do when it comes to tariffs. If you look at what Morgan Stanley says about tariffs, let's just look at it. Morgan Stanley estimates that a 60% tariff on China and 10% tariff on the rest of the world all at once could end up boosting core inflation about 90 basis points, 0.9%, and could end up reducing gross domestic product by around 1.5 percentage points. They're hoping that there will be a little bit more of a phased-in approach for tariffs. Or they question, is Donald Trump's approach just basically a form of negotiating? And in doing so, maybe we won't actually get day one tariffs. We'll just get a lot of negotiations around threats of tariffs, which might end up being best case scenario, especially if we can work out deals that are win-win for the United States. I suppose we'll see. But the proposed tariffs right now, 60% on China, up to 10 to 20% on the rest of the countries in the world. Not that great, especially the amount of tariffs that could be layered on South American countries as well, even potentially Mexico, to sort of limit the expansion of the Chinese auto industry. Painful. These sort of tariffs could also help contribute to pushing or keeping countries like Germany in recession, as tariffs could affect European countries as well. And Germany's struggling right now. Don't get me started about the collapse of the German coalition government. We'll get to that in a different video as well. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, by the way, if you want these sort of insights. But anyway, Donald Trump proposes lighter regulations on mergers for the oil and gas industry and sort of, honestly, mergers in general. I mean, think Spirit and JetBlue that got blocked, and now Spirit's filing bankruptcy. Certainly seemed like that deal should have gone through. Donald Trump plans to pull out of the U.S. The U.S.'s joining of the Paris Climate Accord again. Remember, the U.S. joined it, Trump left it, Biden joined it again, and now Trump plans to leave it again. He could potentially end the rest of the Inflation Reduction Act tax credits, loosen these EPA rules, and potentially move the EPA out of Washington, D.C. Some say this is to minimize the connection of the EPA to environmental lawyers and lobbyists. The EPA says they're a big fan of trying to provide environmental justice. Biden wanted 40% of environmental benefits to go to poorer areas. Donald Trump says all this stuff just makes everything more expensive, and you got to get rid of it. Now, Donald Trump also expects to potentially, again, remove protections for federal land that potentially increase risks to endangered species, but could open up more land to natural gas and oil drilling or fracking. In his last administration, he opened up about 10 million acres of public lands to fossil fuels. He also plans to invoke what's known as the enemy within attacks. Now, there have been a lot of folks saying you can't target Americans using the military to target enemies within. There's this thing called the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which does not allow active duty troops to participate in civilian law enforcement. However, there are two loopholes here. Number one, you could use the National Guard, which is exempt from this, and under Title 32, if they're controlled by the state, they can indeed basically enforce laws with local law enforcement and round up enemies within. Or you could use Title 10 and use the National Guard on a national level. That would require congressional approval, but it only requires a simple majority, which Trump has. Donald Trump is also expected to pardon the quote-unquote January 6th hostages. Now, this one I think is really interesting because I just saw a piece about somebody who broke a door getting sentenced to, I think it was 9 years. Boy, it was somewhere in here. You know, I might just try Googling it. I saved it on my desk. But I think one of the January 6 folks just got sentenced to 9 years for breaking down a door. And a lot of these, it's 8 years. A lot of these folks could end up getting pardoned by Donald Trump. Take a look at this article right here. A man who stormed the U.S. Capitol and smashed glass panels on a door moments before a police officer fatally shot another rioter climbing through the opening. This would be Ashley Babbitt, right? Was sentenced on Thursday to 8 years in prison. So in other words, right after the election, like 2 days after, this person got sentenced to 8 years. So they're probably like, oh my gosh, please pardon me. Especially if they don't actually have to report to jail for a while. Zachary Alam was one of the first rioters sentenced this week, since this week's electoral victory by President Trump. Before learning of his sentence, he called for a pardon of patriotism. I want a full pardon with the benefits that come with it for being a patriot. This is a 35-year-old Air Force veteran from, Ashley Babbitt was the 35-year-old Ashley veteran. Alam used a helmet to breach a barricade to the speaker's lobby doors. Interesting. In the same area where Ashley Babbitt tried to climb through the shattered glass. Jury convicted Alam last year of 10 counts, including a felony charge that he obstructed the congressional certification of Biden's victory. Alam conceded that he broke the law on January 6th, but he says, "I believe in my heart that I was doing the right thing. Sometimes you have to break the rules to do what's right." Footage of Alam exhorting the mob to attack members of Congress before they escaped and then punching out windows of the barricade protecting them was streamed to viewers around the world, which made him immediately infamous. We should try to Google this guy just to see if we could get a picture of him. I remember covering the event completely on J6. You can actually watch my stream on that. There he is. Oh yeah, here's us punching the glass. Yep, that's the Ashley Babbitt window. Wow, that was right here because they ended up retreating. There's the broken glass, or this could be after Ashley Babbitt was shot. I'm not sure. Because they cleared this area out after Ashley Babbitt was shot. Just remember watching it live. It was intense. Anyway, okay, let's get to more of the coverage here. So, pardoning on day one could happen. This person could get pardoned. Donald Trump also promises to fire woke generals and especially Special Counsel Jack Smith. Pledges to drill, baby, drill. He has in the past pledged to fire Jerome Powell, which Jerome Powell says would be illegal and he would not step down. But Donald Trump could fire him on the basis of neglect in his duty or malfeasance by basically arguing Jerome Powell's screwing something up. He'll probably fire Gary Gensler to, as he says, end the persecution of crypto. He will probably also ban gender-affirming care for minors. This will get sued like crazy, but he'll do it. He's talked about getting rid of the Department of Education, which he could do with Congress. You probably need 60 votes to pull that off, though, so you'll probably get blocked by Democrats on this one. And he's wavered on this before because he's argued that some states are going to need the help, that they just suck and can't figure it out alone. We talked about no taxes on tips, and we've talked about the potential for tariffs, which a lot of folks like Stanley Druckenmiller worry will be inflationary. But then others say, hey, you know what? There's no guarantee that he's actually going to go through with it, so don't worry about it so much. All right, interesting. So these are some of Donald Trump's day one plans. Now, what does all of this mean for us? Well, day one plans probably could be pretty dang dramatic. Donald Trump has planned so much for day one. And he's had a day one before, which I hear a lot of presidents talk about, oh, yeah, we're going to do a lot on day one, and then they just don't. I mean, Biden did promise to end the Keystone XL pipeline, which I think he did on day 2, if I'm not mistaken, so we'll give that one to him. But Donald Trump has had a day one before. I wouldn't be surprised if he actually does end up pulling off what he's looking to do, and you'll get the pardons. I think that'll happen. I think you probably are going to get the state of emergency on the border. That would make sense, but you're really going to need that budget reconciliation process to really get the funding ramp up and start actually working mass deportations. So I don't think you'll start seeing those deportations day one, but you might see some end to some of the temporary protected statuses, which is going to suck for a lot of people who are here on those statuses. But then again, like a lot of people say, and Trump says, well, they should leave and come back through the appropriate channels so they can appropriately be vetted. As far as markets, I think Donald Trump's day one policies are less likely to affect markets because even if Donald Trump has tax policy change, even on day one, it would probably take until 2026 for you to realize any tax policy change. So I don't really see your money being affected on day one. Day one would likely be more gender-affirming care, EPA rules, tax rules wouldn't really affect until 2026. And then, of course, if you're an undocumented immigrant, there would be concerns, I would say, probably even before day one, just because agencies are going to start preparing for day one beforehand. As far as, this idea of inflation, I'm not terribly worried about that, mostly because most companies have a lack of pricing power right now. I think a greater concern would be, are we going to be in a recession by the time Donald Trump takes office, or are we trending towards one? A lot of that is going to depend on jobs reports. it's possible that after Donald Trump won, companies start going on a hiring spree, and you actually just totally avoid a recession because Donald Trump won, and you get a total reversal in jobs, which would be fantastic for the economy. That is possible. And that'll also be really good for my real estate startup, HouseHack, which if you want to invest in, by the way, you can. Go to househack.com to learn more about that. This video is not a solicitation or the PPM. As far as, let's see here. So we talked tax policy changes. The stock market on day one, I think most of the enthusiasm for Trump will be priced in before Trump actually takes office. That does create some risks of disappointment once he does take office. Although some of that could be driven by what ends up happening with the labor market. So it's almost certainly too soon to tell. But markets have started pricing in Trump before the election and then have continued pricing him in afterwards. Now we're going to get to, okay, cool, are these valuations fair, and could there be a correction either between now and the actual inauguration or afterwards? Who knows? There's always going to be another time where markets are fearful. So if you're waiting to invest more, I always say you have two choices. Choice number one is dollar cost average. Choice number two is wait for fear. And right now we're not at fear. We're at greed. And market momentum is considered at extreme greed, although the number of new 52-week highs and lows is technically at fear, as well as the amount of stocks going up, which is also a little bit of a red flag warning, actually, that potentially only a few stocks are actually driving indices up. And when this breadth declines, it's possible you could end up walking into some kind of like an August crash or correction. Who knows? Market volatility is neutral, junk bond and safe haven demand in the greedy category. So a little mixed right now. That's how we get to about 61 on greed, which is surprising with all these all-time new highs that we're not at extreme greed, but we're not because of the balance of breadth. Few stocks rather than all stocks. Okay, so that's that. Now, if you want my trade alerts when I trade during the day, make sure to join the Stocks and Psychology of Money group, linked down below. And get the free alpha newsletter every morning to start your day at 6:15 a.m. by going to meetkevin.com/alpha. Also linked down below. Thanks so much for being here, folks, and we'll see you in the next one. Goodbye and good luck.
Why not advertise these things that you told us here? I feel like nobody else knows about this.
We'll try a little advertising and see how it goes.
Congratulations, man. You have done so much. People love you. People look up to you.
Kevin Paffrath there, financial analyst and YouTuber. Meet Kevin. Always great to get your take.